Life often takes turns we don't see coming. Sometimes these turns make us stronger, and sometimes they break us apart. It can come out of nowhere and give us the chance of a lifetime, or take away the person or thing we love the most. But we shouldn't be afraid of the unknown because of this. Life is all about taking on the challenges it throws at us and coming out on top. Well, it is always possible to put on a brave face when the future is unknown, and when life puts you in a situation that you will regret for the rest of your life. Viktor Moisenko, who was from Osipovichi, Belarus, was taking a train from Minsk back home to Osipovichi one nice morning. As he went on this trip with his 4-year-old daughter, Yulia, it was one of the most important trips of his life. This was the first time he took his little girl on a train, but he had no idea that this trip would change the rest of his life. His excitement was through the roof. He couldn't wait to show his daughter all of nature's wonders and man-made things, so he could make her first trip memorable. As it was January, they were stuck in a whiteout, but they decided to make the best of it by playing in the snow and setting up a camp on a drifting ice floe. Yulia was having more fun than she ever had before. When Viktor's wife saw the news on TV, she became worried. She called the hotel several times to make sure they were safe. They stayed up all night watching the snow and waiting for the roads to clear, but nothing like that happened. Yulia did get some sleep, but Viktor couldn't stop thinking about how they would get home tomorrow. Viktor woke up after a restless night to find that the snow was still falling at the same rate. This really upset Viktor, because he couldn't change his mind about going home, because his wife and her little girl were waiting for him. Even though the trip wasn't very long, the blocked roads made it harder. Could they get home without getting hurt? They finally had to leave the next morning to go home, because their train was early in the morning. They thought the roads would be blocked because it snowed a lot last night, but when they went outside, it seemed like they couldn't even walk. Viktor was worried about how he would get to his destination, especially with his child. Yulia was still fast asleep, so he just picked her up and put her on his shoulder without waking her up. When he got to the station on a snowy morning, he was surprised to see so many people there. As he was getting on the train, someone pushed him from behind. His daughter was about to fall out of his hands, but he managed to keep her in place. He turned to see who it was, but the crowd was so crazy that he couldn't catch the person who did it. They got past the gate and into one of the compartments. Viktor was a little bit relieved when he and his daughter stepped onto the train from the busy platform. He seemed to be safe from a danger he didn't know about. What did he fear, and was it safe for him and his daughter now? When Viktor found a quiet compartment, he rushed in to take his seat and was relieved to see a couple with a child in front of them. He sat down on the seat, and he put his sleeping daughter on the seat next to him. He looked at the face of his daughter and breathed a sigh of relief. Was there no danger at all? Viktor's eyes kept closing because he was already tired and the night had already been stressful. He had had trouble sleeping last night and wanted to take a nap, but he tried to stay awake because he didn't want anything to happen to his daughter. He fell asleep while watching his daughter because he was so tired. He didn't know how much or how long he had slept, but he felt very calm and at ease. When he opened his eyes and looked next to him, he couldn't breathe. He looked all over the compartment for his daughter, but there was no sign of her. He was surprised to see that the family that had been sitting there had also left. What happened to his daughter? He looked for his daughter everywhere, but there was no sign of her anywhere. He was scared and had no idea what to do. He had tears in his eyes. The phone in his pocket rang, and it was his wife calling. He couldn't bring himself to call her and tell her what had happened. He walked slowly around the station, but he couldn't find any sign of his daughter. His wife kept calling him, but he didn't have the courage to answer, so he kept avoiding the phone. Then, all of a sudden, he wiped his face clean of tears and ran to the station to ask for help. Could it help him find his daughter? When he tried to get into the office, the guards stopped him and stood in front of him. When they asked him why he wanted to go in, he didn't say a word. He felt nothing and couldn't move. When the guards asked him again, he told them that his daughter had gone missing and asked them for their help to find her. He asked the station master to say his daughter's name over the microphone so that he could still find her if she got off at a different gate. But when the station master said her name and the name of the station, Viktor was again surprised to find out that he had gotten off at a different station. Now he was really lost, and he blamed himself for being so careless. He was too scared to call his wife and tell her what had happened, but he couldn't do anything else. So he took a train back to his hometown and called the police to tell them what had happened. When he got home, he was very upset. When he rang the doorbell, his wife opened it and was glad to see that she was safe. How would you tell her what happened? She asked right away where her daughter was when she didn't see her. Victor was quiet for a while, which worried his wife so much that she went outside to look for their daughter. She knew her daughter was always getting into trouble, so she thought it was another joke and looked for her everywhere she liked to hide. What would she do if she knew the truth? When she couldn't find her, she got worried and went inside to ask her husband. When she walked into the room, he was crying and had his hands over his face. She ran up to him and asked him what was wrong and where her daughter was. Victor couldn't look her in the eyes because he felt bad about what he had done. What was he going to do now? When she asked again, he had to say that someone had taken her while he was sleeping. When his wife heard this, she was so shocked that she burst into tears. Victor comforted his wife and told her everything about what had happened and what had been said to the police. They didn't waste any time getting to the police station. Could they track her down? Soon they got to the station, where he told them about his daughter and showed them a picture of her. The police told the couple that they would let him know as soon as they found a lead, and they asked them to relax and trust the police. The police seemed to be the only way to find their daughter, so they had to wait for them to start the search. While the police looked for the little girl, her parents also tried to find her and spent many sleepless nights doing so. They worried about the safety of their daughter and prayed for her to be safe. Victor felt so bad about losing his daughter that he took the same train more than once to look for her. They looked for her in water wells, shops, empty houses, and everywhere else they could think of. Victor and Lyudmila went from street to street looking for her, but they couldn't find her. But they didn't give up and kept looking with the help of the police. They didn't stop looking for years. After a few tries, the police closed their file. But how could they? They were her parents after all. Could they track her down? Even though the police were still looking hard for the little girl, they were suspicious of everyone, from their neighbors to their own family members. When the police began putting the parents of the little girl in the witness box, things got out of hand. They had to take more than one lie detector test, but they got rid of them all because it was obvious they didn't want to hurt her since they had stopped eating and sleeping to look for her everywhere. After 2 years, they still didn't know what happened to their daughter. It was almost impossible for her to live there anymore since everything reminded her of the past and they couldn't find her. Victor used to blame himself because he thought that it was his fault that he fell asleep and that his daughter wasn't with him today because of it. It was just another day for the couple who had lost their daughter and moved to a new city years before. But they couldn't forget her because she was their beloved daughter. They prayed every day for her health and safety as well. Even after so many years, would their prayers be answered? They were going about their normal day when they got a phone call from the police station. They were scared at first because a normal family doesn't get calls from the police station very often, but they kept their cool and answered the call. Why do you think they would have called the family? On the other end of the phone was a woman who said that a girl had asked about the family and said that she was their daughter. All of them were surprised and they didn't know what to do. Even though it had been years, they still thought about her all the time. And now they get this call they didn't expect. Was there something true? So when they finally heard the news, they were both happy and scared at the same time. The lady inspector gave Yulia's older sister a phone number, which Yulia's older sister decided to call. So she picked up the phone and called the number. She was thinking how to start or what to say, but as soon as she picked up the phone, she forgot everything she had been thinking about and was just glad to hear her younger sister's voice. "Hello, my name is Nadia," she said when she heard her voice. "I am your big sister." Yulia cried when she saw her for the first time. After they were done talking, Nadia gave her phone to her mother. She was speechless for a moment, but as soon as she heard her daughter's voice, even though she was an adult now, she knew it was her long-lost daughter. After they talked, Victor felt better and his guilt seemed to go away in some way. Now they only wanted to do one thing: bring Yulia back. Was it simple? They had a lot of questions, like where had Yulia been all these years? How did she track them down? What did that day hold? Or the big question was whether or not this girl was really their long-lost daughter. Every question was important and had to be answered as honestly as possible. Since the police were involved, they had to go through a thorough investigation before they could get back together. So they all went to the police station the next day for a DNA test. Once they knew for sure who the child and his or her parents were, everyone stopped having doubts. But there were still some very important questions that only Yulia could answer, like exactly what happened that day. Yulia and the rest of her family sat down together after all the tests were done. All of them were interested in what had happened that day. Yulia didn't say anything for a while. She kept her eyes on the wall in front of her and thought about what had happened that day. As she thought about what had happened that day, a tear fell from her eye. Yulia remembered that the man in front of her started talking to her after her father had fallen asleep, and she was mesmerized by the sunset. He seemed to be about the same age as her father, and the fact that he was friendly made her trust him. He talked to her normally and looked at the sunset. His son and wife also started to be nice to her, and she was glad to have new friends on this trip, but she didn't know it was all a trap. When the train stopped at a station, the family invited her to join them and watch the sunset from the open window of the train. She turned down their offer right away because she thought the train could leave at any moment. They told her that this was the main station and that the train would stop here for at least an hour. She was hesitant at first, but they convinced her to trust them. So she got off the train and put herself in danger without even knowing it. She got off the train in a hurry and looked at the sunset from a distance. She wanted to thank the strangers for getting her to come out and see the beautiful sunset. When she turned to face them, the man put a handkerchief over her mouth and she passed out. The man then put her on his back and left with his family. As she blinked her eyes, she saw the train start up while her father was still sleeping. She tried to yell, but she couldn't. After that, her mind and everything else went black. She was out for several hours, but she heard some of what the people said. It looked like they had done something wrong and were running away. She thought the young man was their son, but he wasn't, and they were all part of a gang, not even a family. But now she was helpless and didn't know what they were going to do with her. What was she going to do now? She also told the police and her family that after that day, she was often starved and given injections that made her forget what was going on around her. Her body was weak and most of the time it felt numb. She has a vague memory of moving from one dirty house to another with the family until she was left to her own devices at some station. At this point, she couldn't keep her tears in any longer, and she started to cry as she thought about the day they left her alone. She said that people were going back and forth, but they didn't see her sitting on the side of the platform. She wanted to cry, but the injection seemed to have dried up her tears, so not a single one came out of her eyes. She had no control and was hungry. How did she find someone to help her? Even though she had given up, the police at the station saved her. She remembered that they took her to the police station, fed her, and talked to her about her family after she had rested for a while. Ryazan Police Station, which she didn't know was almost 500 miles from her real home. In 1999, she was taken away from her father. At the time, it was legal to cross the border from Belarus to Russia without a passport, so it was no problem for them to move Yulia from place to place without anyone checking. Yulia might have not had to go through what she did if the laws were a little stricter. The police in Ryazan started looking for Yulia's parents because they couldn't leave a 4-year-old girl alone in the middle of the city. She also told them that the police had commented on how well she spoke with a Belarus accent. However, they never looked for the parents whose child was missing in Belarus. Instead, they only looked in Russia. As expected, their search ended without finding her parents. What do you think the police would do now? So when they couldn't find her, they moved her to an orphanage nearby. She would sit in a corner and not talk to anyone. Sometimes she would feel bad about this and pray to get out. She wouldn't eat much and wouldn't get out of bed. She would cry her eyes out sometimes because it hurt to be in an orphanage when her parents were still alive but miles away. But what would happen next? Lucky for her, her luck changed soon after she moved to the orphanage. A nice family took her in and raised her. Yulia now had both parents and 2 brothers. She was slowly getting back to being herself. She was happier and talked more like she used to. Soon she was the center of attention in her foster home. It's no wonder that her parents loved her so much. Yulia grew up to be a smart and beautiful woman. Now the whole world knew her name was Yulia Gorina. When she went to parties, everyone's eyes were always on her. Every young man in town had a crush on her. But a man named Ilya Krukov showed her love. He was 7 years older than she was, but they were able to understand each other. Could she forget her past and start over with her new boyfriend? Even though she had a beautiful home, loving parents, and was now with the love of her life, She never stopped thinking about her real family. She never told her foster parents that because she didn't want to hurt their feelings, but she has never stopped looking for them in all these years. How did she track them down in the end? Yulia always wanted to tell her boyfriend about her past, so after they had been dating for a while, she thought about telling him the truth. So, after their lunch date, she took him to a quiet place and told him about her childhood, including how she lost her father on a train and was taken in by an orphanage, where she lived until she was adopted by her foster parents. She also told him that she was looking for them, but that they didn't know where she was. When she told him everything, she was ready for some disapproving looks. Instead, her Prince Charming was very helpful. As soon as he got home, he began looking for her family right away. After several failed attempts to find her, they finally found a clue which led them to her family. Yulia looked through every newspaper he could and found a missing person report from the same year that Yulia had been taken away from her father. The story and the photo were so similar that he immediately showed them to her. When he told her that he had finally found her parents after 20 years, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't waste any time and texted him as soon as she found him on social media. She couldn't explain how happy she was, and she was jumping for joy. Her boyfriend tried to calm her down and told her to wait for the answer, but it was hard for her to wait for something she had been looking for years. She texted him for so many days, but he didn't answer, which made her very sad. What was she going to do now? After she had given up, Yulia told her to try again. She called the local police in Belarus, and this time she was able to get in touch with her parents. As she told her story, her eyes filled with tears, and her mother kissed her on the forehead right away. She couldn't make up for the time she had been hurt, but she promised to give her all her love. When they finally got home, she couldn't stop giving her hugs and kisses. After that, she went to see her real parents very often. When she went to see her parents, she and her dad took a train to the train station where everything had happened 20 years before. He told her how bad he felt for falling asleep on the train with strangers up front and putting her daughter's safety at risk. They had a special bond with each other, and that trip brought their relationship back to life. Not only did she find her parents, but she also found out that she had a younger brother named Dmitri and an older sister named Nadia. She thought she was the luckiest and happiest person in the world because she now had 2 sets of parents in addition to her 4 siblings. Now she lives happily with her daughter Christina and her husband in Ryazan. She goes to see both parents and her siblings often. This event not only helped her find her parents, but it also gave her foster parents the idea to look for their own lost daughter. Hopefully, another daughter will find her way back like Yulia did, and her foster parents will no longer have to look for her.